Yeah. So, people actually got here too, so I have to give these away. Here you go.
What the fuck? Holy shit.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out what I should put from the actual Myth of Sisyphus essay, and I just ended up putting the last. All these 4 paragraphs is just like the last of the end of the book. Yeah, the line. There it is. Yeah. Yeah. Originally tonight I planned to do all of existentialism.
That's a lot.
And then I was like, no. I don't even know if I'll make it through all of the Myth of Sisyphus tonight. I let alone all of existentialism. Keep in mind, Camus wrote other books. It's wild. I'm not even. And this is just the essay. This isn't even like his novels. His art has so many more interpretations. You read this, like if 17 people read this, you'll come out with 19 interpretations of it. Like it is so fucking wild. But anyway, that's also why I highly suggest everyone read it. His philosophy: just be a womanizer. That is what we simply must do, basically. And then we'll also talk about. I think this is the first time all night I spelled Sisyphus' name right. I always put the Y after the sis. I always put the U, whatever it is. It's correct, we'll say. Right, yeah, okay. All right. We start at 8:05. It's 8:02 now, so we'll just give it a little bit longer. I'll probably find more shit to prepare with. I did. I know it's very unlikely that so many people will come. However, not only did I want to plan for it, however, if I have extras, I'm just going to put them up around the school, and then I hope random kid who's like about to kill themselves finds it, and they're like, maybe I have to imagine Sisyphus is happy, right? I forgot.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. Wow, I never realized. Is my music still playing? Oh wait, this might be going through. Keep recording though. Okay. Oh yeah, so it heard me walking around for the first few minutes. That's all right. I was also listening to. What's the song? I was listening to one song basically all day. "Walk On Boy" by Doc Watson, and Richard Watson, which is this like. I don't know if it's 60s or 70s, but it's like it's more country than folky. It's like, "Walk on, boy," and it's like, all right. But it's cute because now I've re-understood everything in the terms of "Walk on, boy," so that's kind of fun. By the way, there is a copy I think there's a few copies actually, of Myth of Sisyphus available in the library, so if you do wish to read it, which I hope everyone does, it's great. Camus notably also wrote The Stranger during this cycle. He wrote in cycles. He would write a play, a novel, and an essay, or collection of essays. And he would publish them all at the same time. I think it is at least a little bit inspired by Kierkegaard, because Kierkegaard would also write 3 things and then publish them all at the same time. However, Kierkegaard would usually write essays and novels at the same time, and then when he would publish them, they would all have contradictory views, so you could never figure out what he was actually saying. Camus had actual views, though, and he didn't try to sort of get around this. They did change over time, though. For example, originally he was like, when he was a young man, he was very Christian. Like his thesis is about like Platonism and Christianity. And again, all of philosophy after Nietzsche is just rederivations of Nietzsche, and there's a lot of this that comes from Nietzsche, including the Platonism and Christianity. He was comparing the two, and that's just a joke that Nietzsche makes at the beginning of Beyond Good and Evil. He says, Christianity is Platonism for the masses. But don't worry, there's plenty of good stuff in here. We have this notion of philosophical suicide as well. It's gonna be fun. He also just critiques all of existentialism, and it's weird because Sartre is like, oh yeah, I completely agree with that, and then he just completely changes his mind within like 3 years, and he's like, actually, I am an existentialist. I forgot, my bad. But notably, yeah. So he wrote *The Stranger* then at the same time, and Sartre read it and he published a review of it, and he was like, "This is kind of stupid. I don't know what this is getting at. It's a good novel, I guess, but it's not well written or anything. It's just, I don't know, it's a story." And then Camus published *The Myth of Sisyphus*, and Sartre read that. He was like, "This novel is so good. Everyone should ever read it. They should be forced to read it. We should put guns to everyone's heads. The Nazis currently should be making us read this. I'm telling you." Like, oh, we'll talk about that too. Yeah. Should we start now? What time we got? 8:06. Wonderful.
Oh my god.
Albert Camus. Wonderful thinker. He is at the very least a character. Whether you are Christian or not, whether you believe in meaning, whether you believe in the absurd, no matter what, you have to admit Camus is a very interesting, very wonderful character. We're going to display this in a few ways. To start, we're just going to give his biography. He was born in Algeria. He was a Pion de Noir, I think it's called. Le Noir? I don't know, whatever, French shit. Basically, his family was French, and they were colonizing in Algeria, which is in North Africa. It was a French colony at the time. They were just living there. But they're kind of like next door, France and Algeria. So he grew up there, and then he moved to France, and while he was in France, something happened, namely World War II. The Nazis came in and invaded, took everything out. Hi there. Oh, no, all good. And while living in Vichy, France, that's probably not how you say it, whatever. Yeah, it's while living there, he began thinking about some of these ideas, and that's actually when he wrote *The Myth of Sisyphus*, along with a couple of notebooks and his other great work at this time, *The Stranger*. He also got started working on another work called *The Rebel*. But he was also participating in the resistance against the Nazis. He was writing for a paper called *Le Combat*. That was banned in France because of the Nazis. You know, the bit. Then, as we know, Nazis eventually lost. France came back after a horrible purge. The purge, though, is weird. He talks about it. Should we hit on it now? Yeah, let's do that. So, when the purge happened, so the Nazis left France. And some people were like, okay, great. So we're going to kill everyone who was a collaborator with the Nazis. And this was like, okay, this had like well intent technically because you're killing Nazis, and what's bad about that? Yeah, exactly. And initially Camus was like, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's what we should be doing. So then what proceeded to happen is people would go to their neighbor's house, kick open the door, shoot the neighbor, and just leave. I think like 150,000 people died during this time, and then 50,000 people later would be killed with a trial and everything else. And Camus was thinking about it as it went on, and he defended it for a while, and then someone talked about how there's some woman who was like, you could just be killing innocent people, like everyone should be having a trial. And initially Camus was like, no, they're Nazis! And then he kept thinking about it. He's like, oh no, this is kind of problematic. And the reason why it was kind of problematic is because people who were not big in the resistance suddenly were the head of the tribunals killing these criminals. For example, Sartre, a good friend of his, was in the resistance technically, but he didn't do a lot for it. After the war, he was very important, and he became the head of all these tribunals, which was saying that we should kill all these Nazis. And Camus became very uncomfortable then with this sort of violence after the revolution has happened. He's like, well, guys, we're free. You don't. So it's a little bit weird. And he disagrees then with. Hi there. He disagrees then with Sartre about that. And eventually this would lead to a falling out in their relationship, along with some other issues, which involve Sartre's wife. Basically, Sartre's wife wanted to sleep with Camus. Simone de Beauvoir also, she is an incredible existentialist. She's probably smarter than Sartre, especially because she wrote about ethics. But she wanted to sleep with Camus, and Camus denied, and Sartre was mad that he denied, because Sartre was like, what, you don't think she's beautiful enough? Huh? You want to go? You want to? And then they just fought about it. They were also fighting about another issue where revolutionary violence was very important, and that was, and that was the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was just murdering motherfuckers, and...
Am I just not getting...
That's all good.
Am I just not getting any notes?
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Soviet Union was just murdering motherfuckers, and Sartre was like, yeah, go ahead. And Camus was like, guys, this is actual tyranny. I think it's a problem. And Sartre was like, no, Marxism. And Camus was like, I don't like Marxism. This would eventually be elaborated on in his later work, The Rebel, which would actually push them apart. Sartre would write very nasty things about them, and then Camus would die in a car crash in 1960. When he died, Sartre spoke at his funeral, and then afterwards, speaking about Camus again, he would say, immediately after the funeral, he was like, that bastard, fuck him. And then in the 1980s, when Sartre was eventually old and about to die, he was like, Camus was probably the only friend I ever had. And it's like, oh, it's so good. Yeah, yeah, exactly. They had a very weird relationship too, as you can tell. It was very fun. They had like this contract, and I think this demonstrates something else about love, and it's something that I don't like. But anyway, that's for later. Camus would be, he would win the Nobel Prize in Literature, and he would be the first African to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. He would be the second youngest person ever to win it, behind... the guy that wrote The Jungle Book, whatever. And it's kind of upsetting that he got it, but I don't give a shit. Okay, anyway. So that's kind of Camus' life story. You can understand a little bit with him living in Nazi France why he's thinking about these problems of despair and suicide. With that, let us get into talking about it itself. So, the very first thing he says, there's a preface, and here he's like, okay guys, listen, this is for people that believe in the absurd. If you don't believe in the absurd, this isn't an argument for the absurd. I should explain what the absurd is. The meaninglessness of existence. If you don't believe in the meaninglessness of everything, this isn't for you. I'm not making an argument for meaninglessness here. Instead, I am just saying, let's say it is meaningless, and finding the consequences from that. So that's the first thing to know. You can make an argument for meaninglessness. However, it's kind of difficult to do that because it ends up sort of eating itself. But here, he's just taking it as a premise and say, all right, let's look at the conclusions. So, there's that. The beginning of the myth of Sisyphus, and I think it's also noted here, is he says, there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of all philosophy. All the rest, whether or not the world has 3 dimensions, whether the mind has 9 or 12 categories, comes afterwards. These are games one must first answer. Okay, so what he's saying here is that we have to start with suicide. And it's like kind of a weird argument to make. Like people are like, okay, well no, you can like talk about like free will, whether the universe exists, like why should we start there? And he continues, he gives the argument. He says, I have never seen anyone die for the ontological argument. The ontological argument is this argument in philosophy for like God. We can run through it, but we don't need to really elaborate on it anymore. And he says, Galileo, who held a scientific truth of great importance, abjured it with the greatest ease as soon as it endangered his life. In a certain sense, he did right. The truth was not worth the stake. And so he's noting here, okay, people don't die for like the ontological argument. People don't necessarily die for science, you know? And he says that the consequences of belief shows us why it's so important, okay? And these people are like setting it aside, so those things aren't important. However, there is something important, and that is suicide. He says, on the other hand, I see many people die because they judge life is not worth living. I see others paradoxically getting killed for the ideas or illusions that give them a reason for living. What is called a reason for living is also an excellent reason for dying. There's going to be a lot of these quotes where it's like, oh God, that's fucking good. So, what is he saying here? People judge life isn't worth living every now and then, and they kill themselves. People don't die for the ontological argument. People don't die because of science. But they do die because of this. And because of that, this is where we have to start. This is square one. Okay? And let's elaborate on this. What is called a reason for living is also an excellent reason for dying. You see, the example that I like giving with this, that first comes to mind, I should give a precursor note to all of this. If I offend anyone, it's probably on accident, and if I do, I kind of do it with reckless abandon, so I don't give a shit. Soldiers live for their country, right? They have dedicated their life to their country, and that gives them their reason for living. Or, for example, the values of a country. So you see people, for example, in America here, die for the ideal of freedom all the time because these Americans go to Afghanistan and Iraq or Vietnam, whatever the fuck, and they end up getting killed. Okay. But what is called a reason for living is also an excellent reason for dying. If they die for freedom, that's a good death. Good job there. You know, that's what he's saying here. And he's like, I don't know about that. Let's take a step back here. All right. So he says this is easily then seen to be the most important problem.
Thank you.
Yeah. The problem of suicide is the most important problem in philosophy. That's where everything has to start. And he kind of makes a decent argument there. All right. So now, let's move on. So then he examines what suicide is. He also notes real quickly in the Myth of Sisyphus, he's going to approach this with reason and emotion. He says there's two methods to this, the method of Laplace and the method of Don Quixote. Laplace is this logician, and Don Quixote is this, I don't think he was a real person, but he's this poet character that you probably had to read in like Spanish class or some sort. Anyway, then he says that suicide is like an act of confession. And this is like in plays. When someone kills themselves, what they are really saying is, life is too much and I don't understand it. That is what suicide is. Okay? One notices sort of the ridiculousness of the habit of existence. And this is something that he writes about a bit. The reason why a lot of people don't kill themselves is because we start to exist and we start living before we start thinking. And because we're already used to the habit of living, when we come to the conclusion, hey, maybe we should kill ourselves, we're like, well, no, we're already living. We're just going to keep doing that. But still, very fun. So then he challenges himself with this right off the bat. This idea that suicide and the absurd, whatever, this is the most important problem. And he says, well, there's people who are assured of the meaningfulness of life who kill themselves, and this is kind of common. Like, there's more people who are like, oh yeah, life probably has a meaning or something, and then they kill themselves, right? Similarly, there's people who are assured of the meaninglessness of existence who don't kill themselves. And this is a little bit odd. Like, he's like, okay, well, if the absurd is really the true fundamental problem, then people should be killing themselves if they find out the meaninglessness. The reason why this issue is happening is because we are first trained with the habit of existence. And if the habit of thinking takes over, it does so with such ferocity that we immediately kill ourselves. There's not even any time for us to consider anything else there. You know what I mean? I'm a little bit confused are talking a little bit confused. There's just people, and I'm kind of excited about that. I'm like a puppy. Anyway. So, the absurd, though, when you notice the absurd, that is the meaninglessness of existence, it tends to be associated with a longing for death. Right? Like when you notice, hey, life isn't worth living, you tend to want to kill yourself. There seems to be a correlation here. He notices this. We can also look at Hamlet with this. To be or not to be, that is the question. To be means to exist. What Hamlet's considering when he says to be or not to be, that is the question. He is considering suicide. Also, he notes Hamlet like every now and then throughout the whole thing. And Hamlet's a really wonderful play that everyone should read as well. A lot of reading material for this. Sorry, guys.
I really need to introduce Hamlet to 3 Days Grace.
Yeah. There you go. Exactly. That's almost one of the things that he basically says here. There's going to be a part where he talks a bit about art, and it's going to be fun. But this happens, so basically meaningful life people kill themselves and meaningless life people keep living because the habit of living comes first. And then he thinks about hope, and he talks about hope, and he's like, hope just avoids the question. So what hope is basically hope for another life, for example. Hope that, oh, well, eventually it's going to get better or something like that. And hope just pushes it off. And it's kind of useful because it pushes it off. But here's the thing, it always sort of seems to creep back. This is something that Kierkegaard writes about. Kierkegaard was this existentialist, proto-existentialist, in like the 60s. And he was like, okay, you know what? The world might be meaningless. I'm just going to believe in God. I'm just going to believe in God so that way I don't have to worry about it and it's fine. And he notices like throughout towards the end of his life, he's like, okay, I really have to believe in God because these problems keep coming up. I just have to have faith. And he sort of keeps freaking out and keeps spiraling about it. But this demonstrates though that sort of the ferociousness of the absurd, its willingness to always come back and bite and bite and bite. Camus then tries to make the claim, and this is what the entire book is dedicated to, that life can be meaningless and it can be worth living. And then he's like, all right, well, let's try to figure out this question. Does the absurd dictate death? And he's like, well, there's only one way to find out. Let's completely embrace the absurd. Let's just dive right into it. And maybe if I find out life is worth living, I'll keep living. And if I don't, I might kill myself. I don't care. This is something I have to pursue with reckless abandon. And you have to appreciate that. Like, it's like, oh, he's dedicated. That's awesome. Then we have this, if anyone's seen SpongeBob episode 129 with Squidward and his depression, or has listened to the song Fitter Happier by Radiohead, this is what he's talking about, this part. This is his notion of the absurd walls. Sometimes the absurd hits us. And he writes about it in a wonderful way. It happens that the stage sets collapse. Rising, streetcar, 4 hours in the office or the factory. Meals, streetcar, 4 hours of work. Meals, sleep, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, according to the same rhythm. This path is easily followed most of the time. But one day, the why arises, and everything begins in that weariness tinged with amazement. Every now and then, I feel like we might be able to relate to this as college students. We want to get up and go to class, and then we just notice how ridiculous everything is, and then we just stay in bed, and that is how we spend the day. This is kind of what he's hitting at here, this idea of the absurd wall that suddenly hits you in the face and is like, hey, by the way, life is meaningless, so I just want to let you know. It's like, oh, fuck, and then you kind of freak out. And then there's a couple of reactions you can have to it. There's the common reaction, which is say, go away, I'm not thinking about that right now. Not right now. And this is, again, connected to the habit of existence. You just, you're like, hey, the world is meaningless. Ah, shit, don't think about that. It's time to go to bed. That third joint was clearly too much. Okay. You know what I mean? So, yeah, exactly. But, okay, let's say you don't go the route of saying, okay, go away. Then you say, okay, maybe it is meaningless. Okay. Then two things either happens. One, you kill yourself. Please don't do this. Or you recover. and you live with it and you continue existing. That is the route that Camus wants to take. So now let's actually talk about what the absurd is. Oh, there's a good quote here, though. Let's talk about the good quote that he says real briefly before this. He says, "All great deeds and all great thoughts have ridiculous beginnings. Great works are often born on a street corner, or in a restaurant's revolving door." Similar to like shower thoughts or something like that. Great works of art are commonly thought of in ridiculous places. For example, like mid-shower, or while you're just walking to class or something. Like, it's not a good time for it, but it just strikes you, you know? Similarly, the absurd does this. Like, you'll be in the middle of taking a shower and you're like, this is so strange. This is weird. This is all kind of meaningless. Why am I even doing this? Okay. So, it's a little bit nihilistic. Anyway, that's most of this. So let's talk about what the absurd is. We, as existing beings, as humans, have a fundamental desire for meaning. Like, we just want meaning in the world. We want clarity, we want rationality, we want explanation. We want there to be a single rule in which everything can fall into, you know? We want something like God, okay? Now, the universe, notably, doesn't give any answers. The universe is completely indifferent. We're like, oh, what meaning do I have? And the universe just doesn't reply. God isn't like, well, let me tell you, I made you for this reason, this reason, this reason. Maybe he does with the Bible or something like that, but this is not where Camus is going. Camus is like, no, it doesn't reply. If you're really listening, he doesn't reply. Maybe if you're off your meds, yeah, he might be, but otherwise the universe doesn't give a shit. And it is only the coexistence between these two things which create the absurd. It is not necessarily that the desire for meaning is absurd. No, we can desire meaning, that makes sense. And the silence of the universe can make sense as well. But when they exist together, that's where the absurd arises. He will later call things the absurd. Typically, if he is not referring to this idea, he means the feeling of the absurd. The difference here is important to note because he is not giving 40,000 definitions of the absurd. Instead, this is the definition, and the rest of them are sort of similar to this. They're linked to it. Another place we can see this as well is we have a desire for rationality, or we have a desire for clear and thoughtful reason in the universe. And the universe doesn't give us much rationality. Notably, the existentialists say, well, I have a desire for irrationality. I'll switch it. And then you'll notice, well, no, the world is kind of rational, though. And so everyone's just kind of fucked. And Camus talks about the existential position. He'll call it philosophical suicide. Very fun. But basically, when you replace this even with the desire for irrationality, you can still find a counter to it, and the absurd is still produced. Wonderful. Oh, here he also references one of the feelings of the absurd is, for example, Sartre's nausea. There's a book that Sartre has called Nausea. It's really good. It's just this diary, and it's this person just having existential crisis, and it's kind of funny in a very horrible way, but it's great. He also references of Heidegger, who is this other existential philosopher, who was a Nazi, but Camus didn't know that yet. But anyway, Heidegger wrote about the feeling of Dasein, which is my butchering of German for a word that Heidegger never defines, but it effectively means anxiety caused by existence. Okay. For real. He also notes then how one of the ways that people sort of ignore this is we constantly live in the future. And he says a few things with it. Let's see. But a moment always comes when we have to carry it. We live on in the future. Tomorrow, later on, when you've made your way, you'll understand when you're old enough. Such irrelevancies are wonderful, for after all, it's a matter of dying. We're able to sort of live in the future, and that's how we kind of tend to ignore this. However, Camus says, no, let's live in the present. All right. Oh, he also writes about death here, so let's do this shit. None of us really understand death. Let's be real. To experience the world, which is all we do, is to live. We don't know what dying is. We might see that others die, but it's all like a sort of stubborn illusion. We're never quite convinced, really, when others die. And this is something that some people have said explicitly. For example, the religious folk are like, oh no, their soul's still alive, it's up in heaven or whatever. This is something that Camus is like, well, no, you have no idea. It is simply the case you don't know. This is something that he's going to do a lot. This sort of idea of you don't know, that is the nature of the absurd. And he is willing to say, I don't know and I cannot know. I don't give a shit. He does this with God too. He's like, okay, maybe there is God. I don't give a shit. I don't know if there's God. It doesn't matter then. If I could know, then this wouldn't be a problem. But then this universe wouldn't be silent. You know what I'm saying? All right. So he also writes about the horror of death, and he says that it comes from the cruel mathematics of it all. And the idea is that we know that eventually we're going to die. How, when, why, we don't know, but we know for certain that someday, somehow, some way, we're going to die. And in the end, even like the entire fucking universe, heat death of universe or whatever apocalypse you fancy, the big rip or the cold death or heat death or whatever. Yeah. Basically, we notice the limited nature of living, and this is something that starts to eat away at us, but we sort of just push it out. We just say, let's ignore that for now, because you know what? I'm living now. So he then says, so after saying all this, he's like, all right, this has all been said before. Like, this isn't anything new. This is just existentialism, guys. Like, I'm just working with the same ideas that everyone else has brought up. We're not doing anything new yet. What he wants to do then is look at these premises that he's put out and look at these observations and say, all right, what are the consequences? And he says, rarely does a man live out the consequences of his thought. For example, we can all notice that we are going to die. People are going to die. Rarely does a person act on the logical consequences of that. And that is eventually kill themselves or something like that. Like, rarely do they ever take it so far. So that's important. Camus is like, no, let's take it so far. We're going to figure this out. Let's do all the consequences. We'll do the math, and we'll see what we get. Humans desire absolute knowledge, and this is another part of the absurd. We kind of hit that already. Also, we should probably notice the split between the knowledge that we would like to have and the knowledge that we do have. For example, of whom and of what indeed can I say, I know that. This heart within me I can feel, I judge that it exists. This world I can touch, and likewise judge that it exists. There ends all my knowledge. And the rest is construction from that. So you say, all right, there's a world. I feel like there's a world here. Like, I feel like this lectern is here. I feel like the room is here. I feel like you guys are here. And then he notices, though, for if I try to seize this self of which I am sure, and if I try to define it and to summarize it, it is nothing but water slipping through my fingers. And he's like, oh shit. So even like the only thing that I can be sure of, like myself or something like that, like if you think about Descartes like, I know that I'm thinking, I know that I have this self, therefore I exist. Camus says, well, even if I try to like find that self, there's nothing there. Like there's nothing that I can really be sure of. Like even that fucking goes.
I mentioned the Boltzmann brain theory. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, is that just talk about it.
It's a theory in like quantum physics that it's more likely through quantum means that a brain with memories of existence is more likely to appear out of nowhere than it is for an actual brain to come through natural means, which means that's more than likely that we're just a consciousness in a brain that just appeared out of nowhere in the universe, and that all we can be certain of is our own existence.
Yeah, that's similar to like Descartes has this idea of an evil demon. He's like, well, let's say that everything is just being constructed by an evil demon that's trying to deceive us, and that the world that we're experiencing really is just a manifestation of this evil demon doing all his trickery. I can't be sure of existence, therefore. Descartes tries to get out of this with I think, therefore I am, and he fails then, and then the way that he solves the evil demon is actually, he's like, well, I can prove God exists, and it's like, okay, Jesus Christ. Like, all right, bud.
Well,
You calm the fuck down. And then only after proving God's existence does he prove science.
if I call the demon good, then
There you go. Another example of this is the brain in the vat hypothesis. The idea is that we are just there's all these evil scientists that are just poking and prodding our brain, making us think that we're experiencing the world. Another example is the computer simulation hypothesis. You guys are probably more familiar with this. Remember those 2 years when Neil deGrasse Tyson was spouting off about this with like fucking Elon Musk and shit? Whatever. The idea is that, well, this is all just a computer simulation. I'm not actually real. This is just a matrix or some shit. These are things that we can never really be sure of. And Camus is like, yeah, we can't know. Who gives a shit? And he's like, oh, I really wish I could, but it seems I can't. Oh, no. And then he writes this too. Forever I shall be a stranger to myself. Guys, come on. This is... Artists read this and are like, oh, I'm going to go draw something. Like, this is how it works. Anyway, then he says, in psychology, as in logic, there are truths, but no truth. So, like, I know, like, okay, I'm going to die someday. But there's no truth, you know? Like, there's no, like, actual objective, like, truth, this, like, sort of metaphysical concept. Instead, there are truths without truth. Very fun. And then he says, Socrates' know thyself has as much value as the be virtuous of our confessionals. They reveal a nostalgia and at the same time an ignorance. The idea that he's saying here is like, oh, remember when Socrates thought he could know himself? Oh, wasn't that a good time? He wasn't thinking. Oh, that's good. That was good. Good time. That was a better time. Oh, he was so dumb, but he was cute, wasn't he? That's sort of what he's getting at here. And also he says the same thing about all of Catholicism. He's like, yeah, if you guys think about it, like the be virtuous of our confessionals and stuff. He's like, that's so cute, wasn't it? Oh, it's cute that we believe that there was a basis for that. Oh, isn't that nice?
When I was in like first grade,
Mm-hmm.
I started writing in these notebooks, and I said I was going to learn every single thing in existence, and I would write it all down,
Mhm.
and then I'm going to be the smartest person ever.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't turn out for me.
Another philosopher named Auguste Comte did that. And then he invented sociology along the way. He also believed in socialism and monarchism. And it was for that reason he could never find a job, so he taught out of his apartment. I don't like to think I'm in a similar situation, but perhaps I am. But anyway. Yeah, it's... He says these truths are legitimate only in precisely so far as they are approximate. So basically, we can only be, the more sure we can be about stuff, the only reason why I can be more sure is because it's more fuzzy. And then he talks about science in particular. And this is really good. He says science, okay, this is his big sort of critique of science. And you give me a choice between a description that is sure, but teaches me nothing, and a hypothesis that claims to teach me, but you are not sure of. So the idea is that, well, okay, let's say we can be certain of like Newton's laws, for example. We know how this works, okay? There's no theory there. There's no scientific theory there. There's no like reason for why this is. And then when we come up for reasons of why this is, we can't be sure of it. So for example, Einstein's relativity. Even like we're pretty sure of it. Like it's worked really well so far, like in predicting like everything. However, it's still at the same time a scientific theory, and it's still a little bit of conjecture. This is why when we made the picture of the black hole, we were like, wow, another confirmation, another metal. for Einstein's relativity. Because all we are trying to do is collect as many metals as we can. We're trying to collect as many, hey, this happens to work out here, that's kind of cool. We're not sure of it.
It
So
doesn't even work at the singularity.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't, yeah, and if you get into like the bottom of existence too, it doesn't explain why like atoms are doing their atom shit. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not congruent. I don't know.
Yeah.
You can't meld it with quantum physics, and quantum physics can't explain neutrinos, why they have mass.
Sure, yeah.
Like it's got no loop.
Yeah, so you have this mess here of like these two dominant theories, and then this is like the job of science today, is trying to like combine these two things, and that's why we have string theory and theory of everything and stuff. But Camus like, guys, you fucking scientists, you're doing two things. Either you're saying, okay, I'm sure of something, and it's just a simple description, and from it I can't extrapolate like any actual like what I should do with my life or anything like that. And if I do extrapolate what I should do with my life or how my life works, you guys have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. What the hell? Like, it's like, are you serious? So, that's that. Oh, so good. And he also says that he critiques pure reason as well. And he says that basically the rationalists and pure reason and a priori reason, they only work for the professional rationalists, and that's because they are so indoctrinated in their like shit that it works for them. Most people are not pure rationalists, so most people don't agree with that. Most people don't see that. What pure rationalism is, by the way, is just saying, okay, if I sit and I think enough, eventually I can come to all the conclusions that I need to about how I should live my life and about how the nature of reality is and everything. The most fun person that did this and then proceeded to critique the entire thing is Kant in his book, Critique of Pure Reason. He's like, okay, well, if I think for long enough, I can find this, and this. So that's cool. And then he's like, oh, but also pure reason doesn't work and it's extremely limited. And Kant does a wonderful job of just building things up and then just knocking them the fuck down. And then people will like play in the, they'll either play in the rubble or they'll try to remake it. And it usually goes horribly. For example, and we're going to talk about this now, is the phenomenologist. Husserl, for example, is one of these guys in like the late 1800s who's like, okay, if I just sit and I think in my mind for long enough, eventually I can prove that the world is real. His project was notably a failure. However, he's trying to do something impossible, so give him some credit, I guess, is what we have to. Camus doesn't. Camus is like, you dumb shit. You guys don't know what you're doing. It's wonderful. Anyway. Oh, he also talks about how reason is kind of dominant now, too, in our society. Well, he's talking about in like 1950s, or 1940s, 1950s. But the same can be said about today. Basically, reasoning is like almost most widely held. And at the same time, the attack on reason has never been stronger. And where the attack's coming from is like the existentialists and the phenomenologists. They're saying, guys, there's another way we can get around this. There's another way we can do this. And the other people are like freaking the fuck out about it because everything's just being proven wrong and nothing's being proven right. And Camus' like, yeah, that's just what's going to happen. Then he goes over the attacks on reason because he just wants to attack reason real quick. So he goes over Heidegger. Heidegger claims that anxiety is common to the existential condition. Like we talked about, that's his Dasein. And then to recognize this is to feel anguish, he calls it. This is similar to like despair. We feel boredom because of our inability to rid ourselves of the anxiety, and then terror when we become conscious that we're going to die. And that's just what it means to exist. And he was like, well, we should try to navigate these ruins, and we really can't, so it's problematic. And that's then, therefore, critiquing reason. Jaspers also says that we have lost our naivety, which is very fun. The idea here is that, remember when Socrates was like, know thyself, and we believe that? We should kind of go back to that because it was kind of nice because we thought we could know ourselves. And Jaspers is just trying to find the thread in the labyrinth to get out. and he kind of doesn't do it well. So, but again, the critique of reason's still there, though. The negative parts of these philosophies all stand, and then the parts where they try to create are all very easily just tumbled over. This is also why people who write extraordinarily negative things, as in like destructive things, tend to be more common and more brought up in philosophy than those which try to construct. For example, like Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard was a Christian existentialist, and he wrote a little bit about Christianity and that whole bit, and trying to like get out of it. But his work that he's more known for is his understanding of the existential condition and his critiquing of society's job at dealing with it, and also thinking about how we don't do a very good job with it as a whole. So, and that's the part that's why he's an existentialist. That's why he's remembered at all, is because these other people are like, hey, that guy's kind of cool. Let's write it down, keep working on it. There we go. He writes about this Russian author named Chestov. Chestov looks for truth in reason, and he finds nothing. And then he makes his God the absurd, basically. Kierkegaard does something very similar. And let's try to see why this is. Not maybe why. How this is perhaps more proper. Kierkegaard, when he thinks about God, he believes that we have to take a leap of faith because reason can't bring us to God. So he rejects reason. He's like, guys, that's not working. Instead, I should just believe in God. I don't give a shit. I'm just going to do it. It's a reckless leap of faith, and I hope that God will catch me because that is all I can do. Okay. In his understanding of God, God is this unjust, incoherent, incomprehensible sort of being. And this is, by the way, how most people think about God. Notice the absurdity is also unjust, incoherent, and incomprehensible. So the very thing that Kierkegaard is trying to fight, he suddenly makes into this deity, and then he willfully jumps into it. And it is only in this sense, sort of, too, that Kierkegaard lives an absurd life. We'll also talk about his Diary of a Seducer. Basically, Camus' philosophy, in some ways, can possibly boil down into, just be a womanizer. Go around, get laid. What else can we do? And
But not with that guy's wife.
Yeah, too ugly. No, I'm kidding. She's a beautiful woman. But this is one of his big ideas too, though. Is like, maybe we should just, enjoy experience and enjoy living and all that. And Kierkegaard, to some degree, does this. For example, he writes this book called The Diary of the Seducer, which is really funny. It's the entire thing satire. Most of Kierkegaard's work is very funny because it's all satire. It's all just making fun of shit. And he's like, in the Diary of the Seducer, there's this person who the seducer loves very much, and he never expresses it to them. And instead he just thinks about it and imagines it. And he, in his sort of like unwillingness to talk to them, or as like trying to seduce them like tangentially, he very much fetishizes existence itself, and he fetishizes like the weirdest things. Like it's like how the person walks past him and doesn't acknowledge him. He's like, oh my god, it's so hot. It's so hot, guys. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And he's sort of making fun of this sort of idea. However, that sort of understanding of love and understanding of experience and understanding of existence is perhaps a way that we can try to escape from the absurd. So then, let's see. We also tend to be all or nothing with knowledge. If we say something goes, then we try to build out everything from it. If we can't build out everything from it, then we say, okay, then that doesn't work. So for example, with Descartes' I think, therefore I am, he thinks, I think, therefore I am, and then he tries to build out his entire philosophy from it. Since he can build out his entire philosophy of it, and is in all of like science and everything else, and get all this knowledge, we're like, okay, then that kind of has merit. And then if it's chopped off, though, at an earlier limb and say, okay, this is kind of devoid, you can't get to this, we say, okay, then it doesn't work. Camus is like, we don't necessarily need to take this approach to knowledge, but at the same time, he kind of rejects knowledge. So it's weird. But anyway, He's like, if we believe in knowledge, there's a better way of doing it than what we're doing. And if we don't believe in knowledge, then come join me on the rest of my bullshit. Anyway. He also notes, he continues thinking about this idea, and he's like, okay, well, let's double check this as well. Does the absurd exist if I am dead? No. Because I don't have any desire for meaning. Okay, let's also think then, does the absurd have any meaning outside of this world? Well, no, because the universe wouldn't be silent then. If I'm outside of the world, then the absurd is solved then. So if I can, for example, astral project, then I'm like, oh, okay, then I can like figure out the rest of the bullshit. And he's like, okay, this shows though that the absurdity is necessary because I think we can all agree, beings existing in this world. And as beings in this world, the absurdity arises just by fact of being a being and being in the world. All right. But it's out of both of them. Like, you need both of them to do it. The arrow bit. That's where the absurd comes from. So the first truth that he comes to is just the absurd. He's like, all right, the absurd's the case then. Like, that just has to be it. Like, I don't know a lot, but I can pretty almostly surely know that I know nothing more or less. And like, that's the one thing I got. What are the consequences of that? Most people want to deny this truth, especially the existentialists. The existentialists say, okay, well, the world's meaningless. Well, I can just make up my own meaning. That'll fix it. And Camus like, no, you didn't solve shit. You tried to circumvent the problem. But in the end, you're going to realize that even the meaning that you create for yourself is still fucking meaningless. That absurdity is going to come up and it's going to eat you like fucking Pac-Man. And you're going to be sad. Alright. Jaspers does his absurd God bit. Chestov tries to make this leap of faith too. Chestov says, okay, I can't figure out anything with reason. There must be something beyond reason. Camus says, no, there's no reason why there's anything beyond reason. Like, this is similar to Kierkegaard, too. Kierkegaard's like, I can't get to God through reason. God must exist outside of reason. Let's take that leap of faith. And Camus goes, no, I don't. Why would we do that? You are saying that you don't know. Why would you do something that you don't know? Like, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't jive with me. So that's great. We'll also talk about phenomenology real quick. So phenomenology tries to put a bunch of emphasis in your experience of the world. And it notes that the world is sort of made of like these essences, we feel like everything has an intention, and we can notice this and we can experience it and we can love it and enjoy it. This is a lot like Plato and his world of like the forms and stuff, with his sort of idea that all these essences can sort of be born out here. And Camus goes, okay, but why? That doesn't make any sense. You're making this leap for no fucking reason. In reality, that's just not the fucking case. Like, it's like to try and make that leap and try to be like, wow, everything's so enjoyable. Eventually, you're going to sit there and you're going to be noticing the world, and you're going to be like, oh, wait, maybe it's not. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it's fucked. Oh, no. And you're going to have that little existential crisis, and it's going to eat you again. So he's not convinced by any of the past arguments, basically. He's not convinced that we have to leap out of this. Notably, this isn't necessarily nihilism. Technically, nihilism is a little bit more broad. Nihilism would make this whole project sort of undoable, because Camus is still saying, okay, we can still learn something from the absurd, because I just don't know. I don't know. Maybe I can't. Maybe by not knowing, I can know something. That's something that I know. Nihilist goes, no, you just don't know. I don't know that I don't know, but I know I don't know. And Camus is like, okay, that's dumb, and that's a self-contradiction. Like, I'm not going that way. Notably, for the nihilist, perhaps, this whole project needs to be re-examined as well. Because you can't come to any conclusions as a nihilist. So you can't come to, this is also why it's not as important as the absurd. You can't come to the conclusion that you should kill yourself, but you also can't come to the conclusion that you shouldn't kill yourself. Did I say the same thing twice? No, cool, great. So the joke here is that what would a nihilist book like this be like? And it would just be blank pages because there's nothing really to say. It's kind of fun. Let's see. People's willingness to make the leap of faith demonstrates something important about the absurd. And basically it demonstrates how fucking scary it is to us and our sort of willingness to get out of it. And it also demonstrates how it's very difficult to get out of it. How are we doing with time? Oh, shit, okay. Alright, let's keep this going, I guess. Oh, and then he critiques irrationality again. We talked about that a little bit earlier. The idea is that the existentialist says, alright, you know what? Fuck rationality then. That doesn't work. I believe in irrationality. The whole world is irrational. And Camus goes, well, no, that's not the case either. Like, there's some things that follow rules. Like, for example, it tends to be that shit falls when I drop it. That's rationality, but it's... So, like, these, you have to find sort of this middle path. Like, you can't go fully one way, fully the other way. I'm trying to think about what he would think about Buddhism. Because I said middle path. And I'm wondering if he would be, like, mad at me for doing that. He does, by the way, believe you can be a Christian absurdist. However, you can't believe in God. So you can love Jesus and be like, wow, Jesus is really good at being this absurd man. But the parts where Jesus is talking about God and stuff, you have to sort of take that as him saying, if there is God, I'm fucking God. And you have to take it in this very egotistical approach, and you have to say that, well, what would Jesus do? When we think about that, we should say, well, we should declare ourselves God. So that's kind of fun.
That's great.
But there is technically a way with that. He doesn't elaborate on it too much, but he at least, like, there's like a sentence where he's like, you can be a Christian absurdist. And I remember reading that and being like, you got to be fucking kidding me. You still made room. But no. A small part of me wish he would have just gone the Sartre route and just gone, fuck it. Doesn't work. Doesn't matter. All right. And then he's saying sort of, all right, let's fucking dive into it. A lot of this is repeated, by the way. Like, I'm repeating myself a lot, but that's partly because Camus just keeps repeating himself to a little degree as well. In this ravaged world in which the impossibility of knowledge is established, in which everlasting nothingness seems the only reality and irredeemable despair seems the only attitude, we try to recover the Adradine, that chick who was in the labyrinth thread that leads to divine secrets. Technically, he's talking about Jaspers in particular there, but this is something that we all try to do. Jaspers doesn't just stop. Is that Jaspers or is it Chestov? It might be Chestov. It's Jaspers, good. Jaspers doesn't just notice the impossibility of knowledge. He notices the everlasting nothingness, but then he tries to get out of it. And Camus' like, no, bask in it. Enjoy it. Have a good time with it. So now let's get to actually the big points from this, or takeaways. Talked a bit about philosophical. Yeah? Oh, good. Oh, shit, you just heard the depressing shit. No, okay. That's all good. All right. I also want to note real quick when he talks about philosophical suicide, he says, I am taking the liberty at this point of calling the existential attitude philosophical suicide. But this does not imply a judgment. And it's like, you cheeky bastard. It's so fucking funny. Because he's like, all right, you existentialists, you guys are just killing yourselves philosophically. That's not a bad thing. I'm just saying you're doing it. Just pointing it out. And it's like, yeah, exactly. And then Sartre would read this and be like, yeah, that's completely true. And then like 3 years later, he'd be like, oh, I really like existentialism though. And then he would just completely dive into it.
Guess I'm killing myself philosophically.
And he says for the existentials, negation is their God. The denial of everything. And this is, again, how you can get meaning. You can get meaning out of that. You can understand the world. If the fundamental truth at the bottom of reality is that the whole world is irrational, then you can still make all these other claims, and this solves the absurd. However, Camus is like, no, it's simply not. There still seems to be things that seem somewhat rational. So that's problematic. And then he calls the phenomenologists with all their essences and how they sound. Husserl sounds like Plato. He calls them abstract polytheists. Yeah.
So is this like a club that meets regularly?
Yes.
Okay, 8 to 10 then I assume on Thursday?
Yes, and Tuesdays as well.
What time?
8 to 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna head out.
Yeah, all good. I will say that on Tuesdays we do political philosophy. Next meeting we are going over the French Revolution.
Oh, let's fucking go.
So that'll be fun.
What did you go over on
Have a good rest of your
Tuesday?
day.
I was like swamped with homework and I didn't end up coming.
Oh, yeah. We went over Hobbes, Locke, and Adam Smith. You know, the basics of those fuckheads. All right. Kierkegaard was swallowed up by his god. Parmenides was plunged into the one. Parmenides believed in this grand unity of the universe. It's kind of like Hegel. I'm going to compare him to Hegel because that seems accurate. But anyway. But here thought hurls itself. Oh wait. Yep, that's right. But here thought hurls itself into an abstract polytheism. But this is not all. Hallucinations and fictions likewise belong to the extratemporal essences. So even if we have hallucinations and you're a phenomenologist, you can still be like, wow, there's this beautiful world, even ones that I hallucinate. And Camus is like, yeah, that's great and all, but I don't know if you noticed this. It's fucking meaningless. Back to it. Just go fuck yourself. So then he carries this, he keeps doing this. Should we go to the actual happy stuff now? Yeah, let's do so. All right. 51. Wonderful. All right. The absurd man, and I use man here because he uses it. He's not necessarily sexist, but he was a womanizer. We'll talk about this with his biography. There was one day when he was leaving New York to go back to France in I think the 50s. And he wrote all of these beautiful, lovely things. There's 4 letters that he sent that day. And it's oh, sweetheart, how I miss you. I love you dearly. I can't wait to be in your arms and rejoice with you, whatever, all this. And he wrote this, these 4 letters, all of them to different women. And it's him trying to, I like to believe that he is living the absurd way, sort of. However, this sort of results in this womanization. It's possible that he has some issues with feminism. However, it's a lot harder to critique, especially because of the effect that absurdism has had on the feminist movement, where people go, yeah, all of life is meaningless. Fucking why are you making us suffer more? Just knock it the fuck off, please and thank you. And I think in The Rebel he talks about women a little bit more, about how they also should rebel, all that. But anyway, the absurd man doesn't want to do anything he doesn't understand. This is why he doesn't make the leap of faith. He doesn't understand religion. He doesn't get making that leap of faith. This is the sin of pride. He knows that's a sin of pride, but he doesn't know what sin is. So it doesn't fucking matter. He is, the core theme of this. Is it possible to live life without appeal? That is to say, appeal to God or appeal to irrationality or appeal to something else. Can we just live? Living in experience is to accept it fully. One notices the absurd and is able to live life more fully. So the idea that he goes from with here and this is something I enjoy quite deeply, is he says, no, if you notice the absurdity, you can actually live a more fulfilling life than if you were, for example, a Christian. Or not necessarily, a Christian who believes in God. I guess we'll make that caveat because fucking Camus. It's kind of like Harry Potter. That's what I'm going to compare it to here. So, with Harry Potter obviously believes in Voldemort. A lot of people don't believe in Voldemort, right? They say, well, that was a problem, it's not a problem anymore, or whatever. Harry Potter believes in Voldemort, and because of this, he revolts against Voldemort. Like, you have to believe in Voldemort to revolt against him. Some people say, no, he's not real, and still try to revolt, but it's not as true. Harry Potter, on the other hand, has this true revolt. And that is sort of, this theme then is pushed forth, that we have to face the existence of the absurd and then revolt against it. And it's only through facing the existence can we revolt against it. This is very similar to the teenage girl idea that we should live out of spite, which I find a lot of value in. The reason why I reference it as a teenage girl idea is because I have a good friend back home who was like 13 and would endlessly rant about how the reason why we should exist and why we don't kill ourselves is out of revolt against life, out of spite for our existence itself is why we continue to exist. Suicide is an act of acceptance. It's lying down on the train tracks and taking it. Instead, we should be, screaming at the train until it hits us. But, yeah, there we go. Some people try to get out of the train tracks. They don't. They'll notice that when they're dead, but we won't talk about that. Anyway, the first consequence, then, of the absurd is revolt. Okay. We have to revolt against the meaninglessness, against the absurd, against all of this, and we do that in part by recognizing it. You cannot get out of this by saying, no, this isn't real. That's not a way out. Like, technically you can keep living, but that's not true living. You're missing something. We have to go through it this way. All right, so that's the first idea. And then he thinks about free will. And he's like, guys, I don't give a shit about free will. I don't know. That's what I'm getting at here. It doesn't matter whether or not we have free will. I know that I feel like I have free will. That is what matters. I feel like I have the ability to control my experiences, to control my body to whatever degree I can. And the problem of freedom is only important for people who believe in God, he argues. And the reason why it's important is because they believe in God, therefore you have to enter into the problem of evil. Problem of evil is that, well, okay, if we don't have free will, then that means God has determined everything, and this is like all part of God's plan. But the issue there is there's horrible evil in our world, so did God just want us to experience horrible evil? That doesn't make sense. Therefore, God must be, not good. But then, on the other hand, you say, okay, well then, God gave us free will and allows us to do as we wish. And then we have to conclude, because of that, because there's evil in the world and shit, we have to say that God must be limited in his power some way because of our ability of free will. This is something theologians fight about all the time. I don't give a shit. Camus doesn't give a shit because it doesn't fucking matter. I feel free. I only know freedom in thought and action. I think I put the little part that he said before that as well. This is in The Absurd Freedom. He says, the only conception of freedom I can have is that of the prisoner or the individual in the midst of the state. The only one I know is freedom of thought and action. This is also important because this gets at the French conception of liberty, which we're going to talk more about on Tuesday. The French conception of liberty is different than the American conception. When we think about liberty, it's freedom from government. Rather, when the French think about it, they think that the government ensures your freedom, and it gives you your freedom. Whereas if you're existing in the anarchy in nature or whatever, you'd kind of just die. And the state tries to guarantee your ability to freedom. I only know freedom through thought and action. It's so good. Anyway. So then we also notice with death. Death really makes us put down the chips here, is how he puts it. Something that we notice is that freedom doesn't seem to have much value if we don't have an eternity for it. And the absurd shows us that we don't have any future, though. We never have access to the future. Instead, we only have access to our experiences, the present. And he says, well, if you guys are thinking so much about death and so much about that stuff, then just fucking stop, because you're screwing it up. What you should be doing is, while you're trying to live your life, you should probably be living. That's the big idea here. And how you live, if you recognize your experience, the manner in which you'd live, is a one that is fundamentally free. Does that make sense? Sweet. All right. Death and the absurd lead to our only reasonable freedom, and this is how we live and experience. This is truth number 2. The revolt is number 1. Freedom's the second one. You'll notice he has this tripartite thing. He was raised Catholic, so maybe that's why. Because they have a lot of... I don't know if you notice the Catholics, but they have a big thing about threes. The other reason why it might be is because he might be influenced by Hegel, but I doubt this, especially to the degree that he hates Marxism. So that wouldn't make sense. But Hegel also has this obsession with threes. He's not Catholic, though. He's Protestant, so that's a little bit different. But still, the tripartite got all that bit. Nothing is possible, but everything is a given. To be willing to walk alone without consolation is the absurd existence. Value judgments must be cast aside, and we must live life to the highest quantity we are able to. Now, this is important. This is when he starts to touch on Don Juanism, which is, Don Juan is a character from, well, actually, he's a real person. He was like the Spanish guy in like the 1500s. Again, womanizer. Just got laid. That was his fundamental way that he lived life. However, Kierkegaard writes about him, and I think he makes him the character in, I don't think it's Diary of the Seducer. I think it's a different one, but I could be wrong. Whatever. Don Juan lives his life to the fullest fucking quantity that he can. He sleeps with everyone, okay? That's what he's getting at here. And he has a full life. He has a bunch of experiences, a bunch of meaningful, quote-unquote, experiences. And that he enjoys. And there's something that he inherently enjoys with it. And the idea that he's starting to get at here is going to be passion. This is his third truth. The absurd man lives with courage and... oh, wait, no, I missed. Too far. The sole tragedy is a premature death. The revolting and free man must have a passion for living. I'm also, when I read, I'm not reading from the book, I'm reading from my notes there. After reading it again. But this is the third truth. These are the three truths. Revolt, freedom, and passion. Why should you not kill yourselves? Well, out of revolt against existence, out of a recognition for the freedom that you have and the experience that you have, and you should probably live because you can enjoy the passion of existence, or have passion regarding existence. Then we get into like some of his ideas about ethics, and this is kind of fun. Karamazov in Dostoevsky's book, in The Brothers Karamazov. Wow, it's the same name. That's kind of cool. I'm probably saying it wrong. Whatever, who gives a shit? One of the things that one of these nihilists say is like, well, if God is dead, then everything is permitted. And Camus goes, yeah, technically, but that doesn't mean everything, that doesn't mean that nothing is forbidden. Everything might be forbidden, but nothing might be forbidden. I think I note this quote on here too, maybe.
Yeah, it's at the bottom.
Yeah, wonderful. The absurd does not liberate, it binds, it authorizes all actions. Everything is permitted, does not mean that nothing is forbidden. The idea that he's getting at here is that, okay, this doesn't mean that you should go around and be a dick. I think he actually basically says that verbatim. It is essential to be absurd, writes a modern author. I think he's referencing Sartre here. It is essential to be absurd, but it is not essential to be a dupe, that is a douchebag. This is that's so fun, isn't it? All experiences are indifferent in this regard. So, the idea that he's getting at here is he's like, well, no, you can still technically get an ethics out of this. Like, you can still, if you keep working with this far enough, eventually you can say, all right, I shouldn't kill other people. That's something that he does in his next work, The Rebel. This book, though, is dedicated to you shouldn't kill yourself. And you can ethically say you ought not kill yourself, especially if you recognize the absurdity of existence. So that ought statement, though, is a fundamental ethical statement. That's something that a nihilist, more specifically an ethical nihilist, would completely reject. For example, someone like Max Stirner is probably an ethical nihilist, and he says that, no, anything goes. As long as you are fundamentally sort of being with yourself and you are valuing yourself more than anything else, then you're having a good time with it. And he gives two examples of this too. Rousseau comes to the conclusion that one must walk on all fours, and from Nietzsche, we come to the conclusion that one must maltreat our own mother. So that's the idea that if you Nietzsche comes to the conclusion that we should be sort of a dick to our moms, and that's something he's like, no, stop, you're not. No, you don't take it that far. You guys are fucking up. We can instead sort of rebuild the ethical systems that we have today. He's sort of trying to do something similar to like what Nietzsche's trying to do at his time when he writes The Antichrist. Nietzsche, when he writes The Antichrist, notices how Christianity is not a system that will work anymore for justifying sort of all of our ideas. And Nietzsche says, don't worry, guys, I'll just take its place. I'll just fix it. And he calls himself the Antichrist. And he's like, guys, I'm the opposite of Christ, but don't worry, I will fix it. I will make it all better, and you guys can believe in me instead. Camus, similarly, with less narcissism, is saying, hey, ethics suddenly doesn't have any basis anymore. Don't worry, the absurd will itself come into that gap and fix it. And we can still build out our same ethics from the absurd. Great. Notably, this ethics is very limited, and the only conclusions we can kind of make from it, or the only two important conclusions that he makes from it, is that we shouldn't kill ourselves and we shouldn't kill other people. Then he died in a car crash. So, however, he writes a lot more, obviously, and he says a lot of other things that we can kind of conclude. For example, the revolt, freedom, passion idea. By the way, can you tell he's French? The revolt, freedom, passion. Like, he's like, yeah, why should we live because of revolt, freedom, and passion? That's a very, very French thing to be on about. But anyway. He also notes then, okay, if we live a life without ethics, and we are kind of just dicks to everyone, like we live a life of crime, he says that this is very childish. And I imagine him, like, looking at, like, the Joker from The Dark Knight and being like, you're so stupid, what are you doing? Like, you're not really dealing with any of the problems. You're not really thinking about any of this. You're just being a little kid. Knock it off. And it's kind of cute. He'd probably, like, shoot him or something. But anyway, it's very fun. So, Don Juanism, basically we should be a womanizer, and that is how we can embrace experience. However, it doesn't necessarily need to be womanizing. You just have to find whatever you enjoy and experience in that as much as possible and have passion regarding it, and to try to continue enjoying life even though the absurd is still coming for your ass.
Is like finding something you're passionate about and pursuing that, how is that different from meaning?
It's a big question. It's a good question.
I think it's like you don't
He does.
pretend that it's the meaning of existing. Yeah, or like
it's
meaning
not
of
a
existence.
solid meaning for everybody. It's your meaning that you made.
It's
Is that kind of it?
But that's exactly what he critiques about existentialism, is that they make their own reason.
Oh yeah.
The issue with the existentialist, though, and the reason why he isn't an existentialist, the break there is that the existentialists claim that still, to some degree, even their subjective meaning has objective meaning, and the reason why is because they are the objective. Here, Camus is sort of saying, yeah, it can sort of bring you meaning, but it's not real meaning. This is like pseudo meaning. It's like, yeah, it kind of means something to you, and that's good. But really, you should just be life affirming rather than life denying. And he sees the existentialists and the existentialist way of going about things as being fundamentally life denying. The reason why that is because they are trying to create this meaning thing, and they're putting that above life. And Camus goes, no, it's just life. Similar to Nietzsche in that regard as well, where Nietzsche goes on and on about life affirmant versus life denying.
What would Camus say about, say you're like Stirner and you're like, I'd be happier off dead, like that's what's good for me, like, because like what if you have a mental illness where your freedom in thought, you have those like obsessive thoughts, like negative thoughts in that cycle, and you can't have passion in something because you're depressed. Like, what would you say about that?
Well, still fundamentally, to some degree, you do have some freedom, you would say. The only time you don't have freedom is when you're a vegetable.
There's the revolt.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to sort of, even though we are limited fundamentally in our freedom, and he doesn't deny this. He says, no, we're limited in our freedom. He doesn't necessarily say that we're limited in our passion. You can kind of imply that from him, though. We're limited in our freedom, but in the end, we should still recognize what little freedom we have. Specifically, he has, no one here I've talked to about The Stranger, so it's fine. The Stranger is his novel. I'm going to spoil it, and I feel kind of bad, but everyone should read it. It's a great work, though, like Shakespeare, where even though you know what happens in it, it's still fun, wonderful to read. In The Stranger, there's this guy, and he ends up on death row. And while he's on death row, he's like, wow, I'm still so free. That's so weird. Isn't that odd? And it's like, he's really like kind of like removed and he's kind of out of it. But he's still like, I'm still so free. Like I'm still free in my thought and to some degree my action. Even though there's all these oppressive forces, even though I'm so limited, I still have it. They can't take that away from me. And that's something that he knows too about passion. Fundamentally, they can't take it away from us. Even the absurd, even others, all of this, these are things that they cannot take away from us, and the only way that they do take it away from us is through our death. Another way that we can put this to some degree is through life itself, we get liberty and we have the ability to pursue happiness or something like that. This is why also Camus is very popular in America compared to France. Because it's a very American sort of way of thinking about things. Does that help?
A bit, yeah.
Yep. But even if we do like the calculation, we realize that we're suffering all the time. Like Schopenhauer does the calculation. He's like, guys, I don't know if you notice this. Pleasure is like, doesn't happen a lot. Instead, there's just a lot of suffering. The problem that Nietzsche has, and that Nietzsche points out, is that the suffering is meaningless. And what Camus tries to say, he says, yeah, it's meaningless, but we can try to sort of give that pseudo-meaning to it at least, or we can try to create meaning sort of as an act of revolt. Even though it has no objective meaning, we can still keep trying to do that. Notably, when we're doing this, it is not in the same manner as the existentialists, because the existentialists are sort of taking that leap of faith approach, and they're trying to put it above living, where instead, by fact of living, we are creating meaning. So it's still below us. The existentialists instead put it above them. Does that make sense? All right, sweet. Then he talks about art, and there's a lot of cool things that he says about art. He talks about books as well. One of his chapters is philosophy and fiction. And he goes through a couple of characters and notices how they try to live absurd lives. Especially, he analyzes this one character named Kirillov from Dostoevsky. Kirillov doesn't believe in God. And he has a hard time with this. And he then sort of realizes that he should kill himself. And he's going to kill himself in an act of revolt against the universe. And this is what he tries to do. And this is his reasoning then that he uses. Or maybe I go too far. We'll see. The reasoning is classic in its clarity. If God does not exist, Kirillov is God. If God does not exist, Kirillov must kill himself. Kirillov must kill himself, therefore, to become God. This logic is absurd, but it is what is needed. The interesting thing, however, is to give meaning to that divinity brought on earth. That amounts to clarifying the premise, if God does not exist, I am God. So basically, Camus tries to take this sort of nitpicky approach, and he says, well, no, there's one problem here. And the problem that you're getting at is making yourself into God. He says that's something that the existentialists do. We're not here for that. I'm not having that. We're not going to go that way. Instead, you just say that God is dead and you move the fuck on. You don't say, I am God. That's a very Stirner-like thing to do. Stirner believes that we should act as if we were God. And this is it's kind of words to live by too. You should never do anything that you don't want to do. And you should never, Stirner believes at least, you shouldn't not do anything that you want to do. Especially if you actually want to do it and you're not being governed by just primal desires. But he sort of analyzes then Kirillov and some of Kirillov's problems there. And there's some wonderful things that he says about it as well too. So good. Okay, but more importantly, I think we should probably talk about the myth of Sisyphus. Yeah, it's 9:30. The actual point of all this. All right. All right. So who's Sisyphus? Why should we? Why is Sisyphus important here? Why is the fucking book named after him? Technically, the original name of the book, by the way, was The Myth of Sisyphus and Other Essays. The Myth of Sisyphus is actually just the last essay of his bunch of essays. But still. Okay, who's Sisyphus? Sisyphus is this motherfucker that really enjoyed living. And there's a couple of versions of the story. One of the versions is that, death came for him, and he was able to lock up death. He chained death to a pole and was like, haha, fuck you. And he ran away and he kept living. And then the gods were very upset about this, and the gods condemned Sisyphus to rolling a boulder up a hill for the rest of eternity. Another version of the story, for example, too, is that Sisyphus died, and then Hades was like, hey, you can go back for a little bit, but you have to come back. And then he left, and then he just never came back, and Hades was like, what the fuck was that, man? We had a deal. And it's like, okay. He's also very smart, notably. Whenever they talk about him, I think Sisyphus was actually a real person, and then these myths were later created out of him. I think he was the king, too. Let's see. If one believes Homer, Sisyphus was the wisest and most prudent of mortals. According to another tradition, however, he was disposed to practice the profession of a highwayman. That's like a robber. I see no contradiction in this. And this is really fun. That's what Camus says there. The wisest and most prudent of mortals might also be those who practiced the act of being a highwayman. Just living against fucking everything. That's enjoyable. Anyway. So you have the myth itself. And then you have... So then he has to roll his boulder up a hill forever. And he gets it almost to the top, and then it rolls back down. He has to run back down the hill. He has to start pushing it up again. All right. He's interested in the part where Sisyphus has to run back down the hill. That's the big part where he's like, that's kind of interesting. Let's think about that. He says, it is during that return, that pause, Sisyphus interests me. A face that toils so close to the stones is already stone itself. I see that man is going back down with a heavy yet measured step towards a torment of which he will know he will never end. At each of those moments when he leaves the heights and gradually sinks towards the lair of the gods, he is superior to his fate. He is stronger than his rock. If this myth is tragic, that is because its hero is conscious. Where would his torture be, indeed, if at every step the hope of succeeding upheld him? The workman today works every day in his life at the same task, and this fate is no less absurd. All right, there's something important there. I really want to hit on this. I'm going to do it with another example. Vietnam soldiers that came back from Vietnam, whatever, didn't kill themselves. There were some that killed themselves, but the big part where where a lot of them kept fucking dying, wasn't when they got back. And it wasn't 10 years when they got back. It wasn't 20 years. It wasn't 30 years. It was 40 years after they got back. Notice if someone was drafted at 19, like, I don't know, 73, 74, or whatever, and they serve for a year or whatever, they come back, they're 20, 21. In 75, around 40 years later, they're going to be in their 60s. Okay, maybe they serve for longer, and they're going to be in their later 60s, like 65, 66, 67. That is when they started killing themselves. When they got into their 60s. Now, why? Why would they start fucking killing themselves at this point? Like, they just spent an entire lifetime. Why now do they suddenly feel the need to pull the trigger? You know? Oh, or to put it another way, leap. And this is why he's also criticizing the leap of faith. He calls it a leap of faith to specifically correlate it to the leap of someone jumping off a building to kill themselves. So, why do these soldiers then make this leap? Well, around that time, in your 60s, that's the time you retire. Okay? The issue that happened with these soldiers is not that, it wasn't that they saw all these dark things and they had to live with it throughout their entire life or anything like that. It was that suddenly they had to stop moving. They retired, they were done working, and they were able to sit and they were able to think about it. That is what kills a man. It is not simply just the absurd being there, but it's taking the time to consider the absurd that kills a person. Similarly, the myth is tragic because its hero is conscious. Sisyphus knows the situation he's in. Similarly, the Vietnam soldier knows the situation they're in. And that's why it's tragic. And then he compares it to the workmen of today. He says, well, the workmen don't notice the absurd because they keep needing to work. And this is kind of fundamentally our society's built. Our society's built to make docile workers so that way they can keep fucking working, keep being productive, and we don't have to think about all this. But it is tragic only at the rare moments when it becomes conscious. Sisyphus, proletarian of the gods, proletarian meaning workman of the gods, powerless and rebellious, knows the whole extent of his wretched condition. It is what he thinks of during his descent. The lucidity that was to constitute his torture at the same time crowns his victory. And this is so important here. It is only in recognizing the absurd can we revolt. If we deny the absurd, then we can't revolt, so we can't live the fulfilling life. However, in recognizing it, we also feel this torment of existence. But at the same time, it's true, so we kind of just have to deal with it. There is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn. If, and then this is the part I think actually is all written on the back of the page, and this is like important as well. This is the end of it, and I think I'm just going to go through, read it, and then we'll just keep breaking it down, pausing and analyzing it. If the descent is thus sometimes performed in sorrow, it can also take place in joy. This word is not too much. Again, I fancy Sisyphus returning towards his rock. The sorrow was in the beginning, When the images of earth cling too tightly to memory, when the call of happiness becomes too inconsistent, it happens that melancholy rises in man's heart. This is the rock's victory. This is the rock itself. The boundless grief is too heavy to bear. These are our nights in Gethsemane. Gethsemane is the forest that Jesus chilled out in and was very depressed for like 40 days or 40 nights, whatever. Boundary Waters aren't too far, so if you guys want to take a similar path, you guys can just...
That's what I'm doing over the weekend.
Yeah? Okay.
Well,
That's not for 40 days. No.
I was right before we got arrested, so, you know, if you want to get the full experience.
Oh, yeah.
Don't kill somebody.
Don't kill somebody.
There's a lot of the Boundary Waters that hasn't burned down yet, and it's worth... No, I'm just kidding. That's one of my... I really do love the burn part of the Boundary Waters, though. It's really beautiful. There's like spiders and shit, though. I don't like spiders, but it's still quite beautiful to look at from like a distance, or to walk around into even. Like it's so like.
Find an island.
I like
Camp
Yeah.
on an island.
There's an island. I call it Dow Island. It's half burned and half not burned.
Oh.
The reason why I call it Dow Island is because it looks almost like a yin yang, because like half of it's burned and half of it is still alive. But you can see where it stopped, and you can like try to walk that path almost. So beautiful.
I think it's cool to see where, like, the burned parts have, like, different plants coming up.
Yep.
Because all of the older trees were, like, sprouted when it was a much colder climate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right after the Ice Age or whatever.
Yeah.
So then, and there's there'll be, like, more bushes and, like,
Mhm.
less conifers and, like,
Mhm.
berry bushes and it's cool.
Yeah. There's some like ancient wisdom in that, like out of death comes life or something.
And there's this succession of, like, moss to dirt to
Yeah.
grass to, like, bushes to trees.
Yeah, exactly. You get to sort of experience the full evolution of like.
Oh, yeah.
It's awesome. These are our nights in Gethsemane, but crushing truths perish from being acknowledged. And this is the idea that, well, okay, these crushing truths are crushing truths, but once we notice them, they lose their power. Like, once we, like, notice, oh, the world is absurd, suddenly the absurd becomes less of an issue for us. We're, like, figuring out how to live with it, and figuring out how to revolt against it and all that, too. If we just continue trying to deny it, eventually we'll just end up killing ourselves, because the crushing truths will eventually, as it's implied, crush us. Thus Epictetus, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Oedipus, there we go. I read, I don't speak. Thus Oedipus at the outset obeys fate without knowing it. But from the moment he knows, his tragedy begins, right? When he learns about the prophecy, if you guys read it. He's prophesied to fuck his mom or marry his mom and kill his dad. Not that order, the other way. Otherwise it'd be weird, because it'd be like a polygamy situation. Anyway. Yet at the same time, at the same moment, blind and desperate, he realizes that the only bond linking him to the world is the cool hand of a girl. Then a tremendous remark rings out. Despite so many ordeals, my advanced age and the nobility of my soul, make me conclude that all is well. Epictetus, or whatever, is that? Oedipus, there we go. Oedipus, like Dostoevsky's Kirillov, thus gives the recipe for the absurd victory. Ancient wisdom confirms modern heroism. And so the idea here is supposedly, like we're all supposed to be our own little heroes, and like try to live like Sisyphus or like Oedipus. Or
Fuck your mom.
Yeah. Probably not like Kirillov, because he kills himself. That's all right. One does not discover the absurd without being tempted to write a manual of happiness. And then he makes a joke out of this. What, by such narrow ways? And it's like, the joke here is that like this is supposed to be his manual for happiness. And like he's like, how? What? Really? Wow. Like, and like the reader being like, what the hell? Really? Are you sure? Anyway. There is but one world, however. Happiness and the absurd are the two sons of the same earth. They are inseparable. It would be a mistake to say that happiness necessarily springs from the absurd discovery. It happens as well that the feeling of the absurd springs from happiness. I conclude that all is well, says, whatever, I don't give a shit. And that remark is sacred. It's so good. It's so important. Like, you guys see What am I saying here? He writes kind of clearly, but it might be clear for me because I've sat with it for 12 readings. It drives out of this world a God who had come into it with dissatisfaction and a preference for futile sufferings. It makes of fate a human matter which must be settled among men. All Sisyphus' silent joy is contained therein. His fate belongs to him. His rock is his thing. Likewise, the absurd man, when he contemplates his torment, silences all the idols. In the universe, suddenly restored to its silence, the myriad wondering little voices of the earth rise up. Unconscious, secret calls, invitations from all the faces. They are necessary reverse and price of victory. They are the necessary reverse and the price of victory. There is no sun without shadow, and it is essential to know the night. The absurd man says yes, and his effort will henceforth be unceasing. If there is a personal fate, there is no higher destiny. Or at least, there is but one which he concludes is inevitable and despicable. All right, well, let's break down this despicable line too. If there is a personal fate, there is no higher destiny, or at least there is but one which he concludes is inevitable and despicable. So we don't know if we're free or not. We like to think that we are free. He says maybe it could be the case that we're not free, and if so, we have this sort of fate, whatever. And he says that we have to say that it's inevitable, but we also have to call it despicable in the sense that we can try to revolt against it still. So even if it's deterministic, even if free will isn't real, whatever, again, he doesn't give a shit about free will or not. He says either way, this is still the case. That we have to fundamentally either be free or act free at least. And yeah. For the rest, he knows himself to be the master of his days. At that subtle moment, when man glances backward over his life, Sisyphus returning towards his rock, in that slight pivoting, he contemplates that series of unrelated actions which becomes his fate, created by him, combined under his memory's eye, and soon sealed by his death. In order to live a meaningful life, we have to look back at our life, look back at all of our experiences, whatever, and say, wow, look at how much life I lived. That's awesome. And we have to keep living even though we know that our death is coming and soon our experiences are going to be ended. Instead, we should try to use death as a motivation here. I'll note just for the fuck of it, the 21 Pilots lyric from Heavy Dirty Soul. In the bridge, the line is, "Death inspires me like a dog inspires a rabbit."
Yeah.
That's kind of what he's trying to get at here. This is something that I struggle with a bit. However, still though, you can see the value and the joy in it. Thus, convinced of the wholly human origin of all that is human, a blind man eager to see, who knows that the night has no end, he is still on the go. The rock is still rolling. Last paragraph, here we go, people. This is the last paragraph of the entire book, and it's fucking wonderful. I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again. And that's so good, isn't it? Like, even if you try to, ignore the burden of living, you'll always come back to it. It's great. But Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He too concludes that all is well. This universe, henceforth without a master, seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself forms a world. The struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus as happy. So we sort of have to gleefully run back down the hill to keep pushing our boulder. We have to keep living. And we do this because it is absurd. Because of the absurd. Out of revolt against the absurd. There we go. That's the bit. One must imagine Sisyphus is happy. Why? Because if we don't, then we'll imagine ourselves unhappy because we're all little Sisyphuses. Yeah, perhaps. What time we got? 44. I talked for a while. I'm sorry, guys. Anyway, any questions then? And where to go about this?
I kept thinking about the word whimsy.
Mhm.
And like the joy of absurdity, or like
Mhm.
finding passion is like just kind of the phrase, where's your whimsy?
Yeah, exactly.
Where like
art thou whimsy?
yeah. Like nothing matters as far as I can tell, so
Mhm.
like why not do whatever?
Mhm.
Time to be a
That's
whimsical
why-
wizard in the woods.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's why I like to blow bubbles still.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Why not?
Exactly.
Like
It's important though that we don't. Though the whimsy is very much connected to passion, and that's one of the ways that we revolt against the meaninglessness. It's important to not deify whimsy at the same time. Otherwise, we just end up with a phenomenologist and their bullshit.
oh yeah.
But still, though, I love what you're saying though there, and blowing bubbles is a wonderful example of that.
I have a bunch of plastic dinosaurs.
Mhm.
Because I was happy when I was a kid, so.
Yeah.
Try to be a kid again.
Yeah. Youth Philosophy Club, after all. Yeah.
So would can we say for the person that doesn't believe in the absurd, would he subscribe to Nietzsche's sort of belief that you shouldn't try to like crush someone's worldview by opening them up to this?
Yeah. So what do you do with people who don't believe in this? I would. With Camus, it's more complicated than Nietzsche. And the reason why is because Camus recognizes that in the recognition of the absurd, you can live a more fulfilling life. Nietzsche, on the other hand, says, well, if someone doesn't notice the nihilism, let them be happy, just let them go off and do their own thing. Camus here, though, it's a little bit tougher. Again, the only ethical conclusions he can make, or that he does make, is that we shouldn't kill ourselves and we shouldn't kill other people. Oh, and by the way, people he sees as rebels, he has a long list of them. But he thinks there's good rebels and there's bad rebels, but either way, they still recognize the absurd. One of the people that he views in this category is Adolf Hitler. Hitler sort of recognizes the absurd, and then, but he recognizes nihilism, and in the end, he gives in to absurd. And he says this is demonstrated by the Hitlerian apocalypse, which is Hitler killing himself in the bunker. And in the end, he gives in to nihilism. But as we're back to your question, what should we do with others? I think the good response, I guess, to give the proper response, would be to say that if someone seems to be beginning to recognize the absurd, if someone denies God, then you say, hey, there's a way out of this, read this book, and here we are. However, you can still sort of introduce this worldview to someone who believes the world has meaning to see if this is something that they would want to convert to. For example, there's 5 people in my hometown that I talked about and made them read The Myth of Sisyphus against their own will. No, I read it to some people too. But basically, at the beginning of it, they started they did believe in God. And they hadn't thought about it much. And then by the end of it, they didn't. And the reason why they didn't believe in God is not because they saw God as irrational or something like that. Instead, they saw a more fulfilling life through this than that of Christianity. And one of the reasons for that is because Christianity places such a high emphasis on the afterlife. When you do that, you are denying this life. You are not enjoying this life to the fullest extent that you have.
First time I tried to kill myself, I believed in God still, and I was like, I'm just gonna go to heaven. I'm not dealing with this shit anymore. I'm
Exactly.
just gonna go to heaven.
Yeah, and that's also why he calls Nietzsche does that. Sorry, this isn't him. Nietzsche calls Christianity a a religion of suicides, and he says the same thing about the Buddhists, because the Buddhists also are sort of fundamentally pitted against life. Like the whole point is trying to get out of existence, and Nietzsche's like, no, that's not how it works. You should fucking enjoy it, and so too Camus agrees.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, you said that lyric from 21 Pilots.
Yep.
Why is that hard for you? Is it because if you do revolt, freedom, and passion, then you'll want to be alive? Or is it because you just want to get there already?
It's because nihilism undermines this, and I'm bounce between nihilism and absurdism.
Yeah.
So, for example, the idea that that the dog should motivate us is important. However, it's kind of getting harder to say that. Like, if, in some respects, you can imagine someone who says that it's getting harder to say that. And the reason why is because eventually the absurd sort of just consumes you. And that's something that we have to revolt against. And it is the easiest, but it's the hardest thing to do at the same time. To recognize the absurd, that's real, to some degree, easy to do. But then to revolt against it, that's the Sisyphean task. And it's hard to accept ourselves as being Sisyphus.
So you don't want to see the absurd as a good thing?
It can be. It's a very...
I mean,
It's a very-
different. I
yeah.
guess.
Mhm.
Like it just is.
Mhm.
You can't
Yeah.
place good or bad
Mhm.
on it.
Yeah, they sort of reject those value distinctions, value judgments. Camus does. Oh, there's something else there. Oh, whatever. Oh, and then as an argument against the rationalists, I put this line in there as well. In Philosophy of Fiction, he says, if the world were clear, art would not exist. And the idea is that art is sort of this mess of interpretation, and that's, if the world was really rational, then we wouldn't need something stupid like art. But it is the case that we do, and we enjoy it, and it's lovely. Art in the broad sense, so like music as well, literature. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I
Mhm.
had this thought just stored away for a while, and I
Mhm.
was just digging through it a bit and trying to get it. Back when you're talking about science and
Yep.
about it's juggling between saying something correct but not saying anything at all,
Mm-hmm.
or like so vague you can't do anything with it,
Yep.
or saying something that's true that has no meaning.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally, I mean, when was this book written?
1942.
1942. Yeah,
It was
that's
published in 42, yeah.
yeah, that's about like right after the quantum mechanical revolution,
Yep.
which is when, which it makes sense because that's when this whole debate was going on between like there was like Heisenberg, Niels Bohr's
Yeah.
side of it, and there's like Einstein.
Mm-hmm. God doesn't play
Schrödinger's
dice
side
with
of
the
it.
universe. Yep.
And they were arguing pretty much the same like distinction between the sides of it.
Yeah.
Between continuing on, delving into like the unknown world of quantum mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
using the meaning that we, or like using like hard math
Yeah.
that there's no interpretation of. It's just
Yeah.
math.
It's also worth noting here too, though, while you're talking about the math bit. This is also immediately after the death of the mathematical project as well. So Bertrand Russell and Alfred Whitehead, North Whitehead, they were trying to sort of build up all of mathematics from the basis of logic, and they, I think I mentioned this earlier. It took them like 150 pages to conclude 1 + 1 = 2, and they write under it, the above proposition is occasionally useful, and it's so like you can just hear like the despair in them. But then comes along this dickhead named Gödel, and Gödel also fucked up Einstein shit. Gödel's one of the big reasons for all these problems. But Gödel comes along and he's like, hey, I proved fundamentally that your logical system isn't going to do what it's trying to do, insofar as it's going to constantly be incomplete. You're never going to be able to have a full catalog of all the truths, and you're going to be able to either prove things that are not true, so it's just wrong, it's just inconsistent, or you are going to be able to have true things that are not provable. And it's one of those two cases. This is because of paradoxes can arise with it. Russell also noticed a paradox with it. What's time we got? 55? Yeah, let's do this. Okay. Russell noticed a paradox with his bit as well. So this is a circle, this is a set. It contains members, okay? If we imagine, we can construct sets based on whatever criteria we want. For example, we can say that we can imagine the set of all sets that contain themselves as members. Okay. So for example, this set, we'll call the set S. This set is actually contained within itself, because this is actually a little circle that has itself inside of it, and it's like this infinite regress down. Okay. We're going to explain this in layman's terms in a second here. It's a little complicated, but stick with me. We can imagine also the set of all sets which do not contain themselves as members. For example, there exists here the null set. The null set is just a set that doesn't have anything in it. So because it doesn't have anything in it, it doesn't have the null set within it. Therefore, the null set is a set that doesn't contain itself as a member. The question is, where do we put this set itself, R, the set of all sets that contain that do not contain themselves as members? If we say that it does belong inside of itself, then we conclude that, well, it contains itself as a member, which means that it shouldn't be within itself. So we say, okay, then, so first we say it's in here, and we say, well, then it shouldn't contain itself. Okay, well then we'll put it out here. And if we put it out here, we're like, oh wait, damn, because if it doesn't contain itself as a member, then it should be within the set, and we're stuck within this paradox. We break it. Put another way, there's the Barber paradox. The Barber paradox is, okay, imagine a society, it has a rule. It says that every person must shave themselves, and if they do not shave themselves, the barber must shave you. The question is, who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, well, the barber then is not allowed to shave himself, because the barber is only allowed to shave people that do not shave themselves. Similarly, if the barber doesn't shave himself, well, then the barber is supposed to shave him because this man doesn't shave himself. So the barber is supposed to shave him, and it doesn't work either way. Okay. We can also, last bit here, we can construct this paradox as well with just language itself, like just how language works. Like language itself contains these paradoxes within it. For example, we can imagine is a predicate. So if we have like in quotation marks, is a predicate.
Or like this statement is false.
That's the paradox one.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can say this statement is true.
Or
And that one's also a paradox of
Yeah.
too. But anyway, is a predicate, or is a string of words a string of words, right? So like these things can be true of itself, right? So then we can construct is true of itself as a predicate, right? Okay. We can also construct is not true of itself. And if we say that is not true of itself, is not true of itself, then we find that, okay, let's write it out because this is such a visual thing. Okay, so if we say that is not true of else, oh my gosh, it's been a long night. Is not true of itself, is not true of itself. If we say that this is true, well then that means is not true of itself should be false. So then we change it and we say, okay, it should be false actually then. And when we say it's false, we see that, oh fuck, we did it again. Because if this is false then, if is not true of itself is not true of itself, and that is false, if that statement is false, that means that this should be true, and it's this paradox again. But basically, anyway, the logical project was also completely broken down, and it undermined all of language, and Gödel was just like gleefully hopping along doing this. He also took Einstein's field equations and discovered that time travel is possible in a very messy way. Einstein doesn't like messy math. No, Einstein doesn't like math. Gödel does, and he discovered closed time-like curves.
Cool.
And
I knew there was one like scenario where the universe is like shrinking, or if it's curved, where you'll get back to like your own planet.
yeah, that's
Your
the four-dimensional bubble
mass.
theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's so basically though, there came this, and this is something that he writes about in the beginning. We'll end with this sort of. The answer to the question of the problem of suicide. The answer, underlying and appearing through the paradoxes which cover it, is this. Even if one does not believe in God, suicide is not legitimate. Written 15 years ago in 1940 amid the French and European disaster, that's World War II. This book declares that even within the limits of nihilism, it is possible to find the means to proceed beyond nihilism. In all the books I have written since, I have attempted to pursue this direction. Although the myth of Sisyphus poses mortal problems, it sums itself up for me as a lucid invitation to live and to create in the very midst of the desert. So the idea here is that, as one YouTuber put it, we should dye our dick blue and do things that make no sense, like the dishes. He also compares it to these guys who are shipwrecked and like on their way to Antarctica, and it's a really good video. That's Exerbia's thing. Exerbia might have some problems, but those problems are in his own life and they're not in his content, so that's good. His content's so kind of fun. Anyway, with that, there we go. I'll say good night. Have a good time. Do the bit. Imagine Sisyphus as happy.